Hello everyone, and welcome to some short stories, a side quest, as it were. So I don't think I mentioned it in the very beginning when I started reading the Draco trilogy, but maybe I did, but I'll reiterate for the class. So initially, when I had asked to be given the documents for this particular series, I was on a forum back in, I think it was 2009. And that's where I started inquiring about where to find the Draco trilogy in its entirety so I could read it. And this very lovely person sent me a zipped file full of not only the trilogy, but also some smaller fan fictions that I did not know that Cassandra Claire had written. So this particular installment is one of those fan fictions. Because I was going through them and I discovered that there was a Christmas one. So I decided, it is Christmas time, so why not do that? So without further ado, let us get right into it. A Lucius Christmas Carol. A semi-parody of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol set around Heidi's A Surfeit of Curses universe by Cassandra Claire and Heidi Tandy. Unfinished. Karkaroff was dead, to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the representative goblin from Gringotts, as well as the assistant headmaster of Durhamstrang, McNair of the Ministry of Magic, Nathaniel Diggory from the Department of Recordation and Recovery of Records, and the chief ghost, who confirmed that Karkaroff had indeed passed into the ghostly plane. Lucius Malfoy signed it, and Malfoy's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Karkaroff was as dead as a doorknob. Well, not any doorknob, just the sort that have been charmed to remain silent when you approach. Not the type that tell you, "Turn to the left," or "Push, you idiot, don't pull." I don't mean to say that I know of my own knowledge what there is particularly dead about a doorknob, as I often disregard their conversational attempts. I might have been inclined myself to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of iron magicry in the trade, but the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hands shall not disturb it, or the ministry's done for. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Karkaroff was as dead as a doorknob. Malfoy knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Malfoy and he were cohorts for I don't know how many years. Malfoy was, in an act that surprised even the unsurprisable Severus Snape, named as Karkaroff's sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole residuary legatee. It was not because he was his sole friend or sole mourner, some suspected, but many presumed that Malfoy had a literal hand in the naming. And thus even Malfoy was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent wizard of business on the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. The mention of Karkaroff's funeral brings me back to the point I started from. There is no doubt that Karkaroff was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I am going to relate. But Malfoy was possessed of a tight-fisted mind in discussion of certain topics. Malfoy, a xenophobic, exclusionary, self-important, hypocritical, scraping, demanding, and lying control freak. hard and sharp as flint, who had a reputation at the Prophet in days of old as the most disingenuous debater on the editorial floor. No wand of his had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained, as a solitary in leadership as an oyster, yet as likely to be surrounded by sycophants as a mollusk. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, with gladsome looks not dampened by either supplicant or fear, "My dear Malfoy, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No witch or wizard inquired the current flight path to such and such a place. No muggle-born who knew his face dared ask a favor or apply for a job with the Prophet of any level above messenger, although there were a few generations removed from such base beginnings might feel secure enough to seek freelance writing positions of Malfoy. Even the blind wizard's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and would wag their tails as though they said, "Now I at all is better than the evil eye, master." But what did Malfoy care? It was the very thing he liked. He liked it almost as much as he liked controlling the thoughts of the masses of witches and wizards who partook of his publishings, without consideration for whether the controls he was creating were in fact beneficial or harmful. It was all advertising and publicity, and thus was all good for and to him. He liked it far better than Christmas. The warm hearts of the common wizard on the street, the sparkling decorations that covered the trees and shops, and even the houses of Hogsmeade, Godric's Corner, Chipping Sodbury, and Chudley. Every Boxing Day, Malfoy allowed his family a sleigh ride through the streets of Puddlemere, though this was more for the pageantry of flaunting his wealth than the actual enjoyment of the outing. Once upon a time, in fact, of all the good days of the year, on Christmas Eve itself, old Malfoy sat busy in his office, high above the bustle of Diagon Alley. It was cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal, and he could hear the people in the court outside go about casting warming spells in the air, beating their hands upon their breasts, and stamping their feet upon the cobblestones to warm them. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been light all day. The torches were flaring in the windows of the neighboring offices, like ruddy smears upon the palpable air. And just more than 7 feet above the cobblestone streets, so the owls that flew amongst the flames needed to keep a careful eye on the obstacle course. On this day, none of them would burst into flames from an inadvertent twist in their route. The fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole, and was so dense without that although the court was of the narrowest, the houses opposite were mere phantoms. To see the dingy cloud come drooping down, obscuring everything, one might have thought that nature lived hard by and was brewing on a large scale. The door of Malfoy's office was open, that he might keep his eye upon his new clerk, who, in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters from public wizards and witches, so that their names could be archived among the others criticizing the Dark Lord. Malfoy had deemed that Percy Weasley, this new clerk who had been foisted upon him in recent days, would not receive the usual office attained by even such a recent Hogwarts graduate, with a view of the center of the Prophet Office atrium. A magnificent tree stood there in the center, 20 feet high if it was an inch, and festooned with unmelting icicles, torches that were less than an inch high, and garlands made of twisted sickles that roped their way around the tree, twisting and turning amid the green. Since his acquisition of the Prophet after the return of the Dark Lord, Malfoy had insisted that only green and silver would be allowed. Ornaments of no other color were permitted. There were no packages beneath the festooned tree, however, as clutter was such an ugly sight, and generosity even more so. "A Merry Christmas, sir," cried one of the staffers, Midden in a cheerful voice. "Bah," said Malfoy. "Humbug." He had just been walking rapidly in the fog and frost, and was not one to be moved by so brazen a statement, even if it was the first holiday since the Dark Lord's return. So much needed to be accomplished during the upcoming holiday season that this cheerful Albert Midden, who faced Malfoy with a glow on his ruddy face, was almost too sparkling for the owner of Malfoy Manor to bear.
"Christmas a humbug, sir,"
said Midden, attempting to spread the holiday cheer.
"You don't mean that, I am sure. You have fully enjoyed the holiday in years past."
"I have, but I do not," said Malfoy.
"Merry Christmas, nonetheless," Midden retorted. "What right have you not to be merry? You're settled enough in the Dark Lord's good graces, now that he's returned. One truly should be looking forward to the holidays as the Dark Lord has set the various celebrations that we have heard about on the lower levels of your gallery below."
Malfoy, having no better answer ready on the spur of the moment, said, "You can certainly keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine. There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say," Malfoy continued. "Christmas, however, has never been one of them. It's the only time I know of when witches and wizards take leave of their senses, when they should be looking to their galleons and sickles. For what is luxury around this time if you don't have the capital to spend it on?" An ill-timed cough from Weasley in the tank brought the attention of his employer squarely on him, and Malfoy whirled around. "Let me hear another sound from you," said Malfoy, "and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your position."
"You're quite a powerful speaker, sir," Midden added as he moved to return to his station. "I wonder you don't go into the ministry."
Malfoy returned, as he was wont to do, to the editorial office to put his last touches on the front page editorial for the Christmas Day story, which would appear to each pureblood reader as a personalized message from the Malfoy family, wishing each a happy holiday, a delicious Christmas feast, and a promise that with the segregation of mudbloods away from the grand community of magic folk, there would finally be a roast beast in the cooker of every deserving family. Mixed families and muggle-born readers, however, would simply see an ad for Wart Mart along the right-hand side of the paper, and the advertisements was set to drip snowflakes onto the table for at least an hour. At length, the time of sending the papers to the press arrived and passed. With an ill will, Malfoy vacated his office and tactily admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat. "You want all day tomorrow, I suppose," said Malfoy. "If quite convenient, sir." "It is not convenient," said Malfoy. "And despite your family's proclivities for inviting those of muggle-born backgrounds to share in your festivities, I cannot imagine spending the energy organizing something to keep you busy here. So, I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning." Weasley promised that he would, and Malfoy walked out with an air of dignity, filled with thoughts about the coming year. Finally, after over a decade of waiting, this would be a satisfying holiday. As he apparated back to the manor, he thought back a year to their Christmas amid the Yeti, then along the Christmases prior. All good, grand celebrations with a sufficient amount of presents for Narcissa and Draco. The one day each year when he knew she wouldn't drink too much, and the boy would pay particular attention to his father's concerns. On his return, the fog and frost so hung about the black old gateway of the house that it seemed as if the genius of the weather sat in meditation on the threshold, and that his object of contemplation was the knocker on the wall, which all, even Malfoy himself, were noted by upon arrival to the manor. Once inside, he would be able to apparate around, but first, the threshold to this, his house, would have to be crossed. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large, and that it had a nervous habit of twitching what would, if it had been a face, be its nose at women who entered unescorted, trained, as it had been, by a house elf in 1893, who was unnaturally possessive of her owner's son. It is also a fact that Malfoy had seen it, night and morning, during his whole residence in that place. Let it also be borne in mind that Malfoy had not bestowed one thought on Karkaroff since his last mention of his 6 months dead cohort that afternoon. And then let any wizard explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Malfoy, having his hand on the knob of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any immediate process of change, not a knocker, but Karkaroff's face. It was not in impenetrable shadow as the other objects in the yard were, but had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Malfoy as Karkaroff used to look, with a leer stretching his face as if he were in on some joke that the other was not aware of. That, and its livid color, made it horrible, but its horror seemed to be in spite of the face and beyond its control, rather than a part of its own expression. As Malfoy looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation to which it had been a stranger from infancy, would be untrue. The knocker had a certain patina. It did not change with the seasons or with moods and trials as others did. It was an old part of Malfoy Manor, and it served its purpose well. But this was a true circumstance of unexpectedness, and it made Malfoy pause with a moment's irresolution before he shut the door. The fireplace was an old one, built by some Dutch merchant long ago, and imported at low expense by a Malfoy who had an affinity for Delft. It was paved all round with quaint Dutch tiles, designed to illustrate a selection of wizarding stories. They were daughters of ocean gods, queens of elven kind, demonic messengers crawling up from the deep, hundreds of figures to attract his thoughts. And yet that face of Karkaroff, 7 months dead, came like a rusted and rutted cauldron and swallowed up by the whole into its dank belly of brew. Malfoy pulled a parchment, quill and ink from the table beside his chair, and commenced creating notes for the speech he was to give at the festivities the next day. A special guest was to be in attendance, his identity masked to the others until the proper time by deep red robes and stately beard. Malfoy wondered casually if certain of the guests would not leave the manor, or in the same condition in which they arrived, then gave the matter a moment's more thought, and concluded that yes, they would, especially those crazy Parkinsons. After several draughts, he stood up again and began to pace the room. In the silence of the study, he heard an unexpected clanking noise, deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine cellar. Malfoy was puzzled at the sound. The ghosts in the manor were all forbidden to make distracting noises with their chains, except on Halloween. A door to a distant room flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. "Quiet yourself," Malfoy shouted. "This is not the time for such annoyances." His color changed, though, when, without a pause, it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leapt up as though it cried, "I know him, Karkaroff's ghost," and fell again. The same face, the very same, Karkaroff with his spindly beard, usual dark robes, pointed hat and boots, the tassels on the latter like the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made of, for Malfoy observed it closely, of anchors, shipmasts, and other items of the nautical bent, all wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Malfoy, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on his coat behind. Malfoy had often heard it said that Karkaroff had no heart, but he had never believed it until now. No, nor did he believe it even now, though Karkaroff looked the phantom through and through, and Malfoy saw it standing before him. Though he felt the chill influence of its death-cold eyes, he was still quite angry, and strove not to fight against his senses. He despised being near ghosts. The sensation of being plunged into a bucket of ice water was one he tried to keep to a minimum. Thus he tried to remain as distant from the spectre as possible. "How now?" said Malfoy, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much." Karkaroff's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Who were you then?" said Malfoy, raising his voice. "You're particular for a shade."
In life I was your fellow Death Eater. I go, Karkaroff.
Can you sit down?" asked Malfoy, looking doubtfully at him.
I can.
"Do it, then." Malfoy asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so laden down with shipping accoutrements might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that in the event of it being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it. "How did you come upon the manor, when the only ghosts who are allowed within its walls are those of Malfoy blood, and those who died on its grounds?" asked Malfoy.
I am prevented from doing as all wizards wish to as they undertake the next great adventure, and cannot travel far and wide.
The ghost of Karkaroff explained, causing Malfoy's face and manner to pale.
Instead, I have now completed my training at the Shire School of Ghostings and Hauntings, and have been tied to this manor, to this place of my death, to accomplish goals that even I know are far and unattainable.
The spectre raised a cry and shook its chains and wrung its shadowy hands. "Oh, do shut it. I find the noise self-aggrandizing and ill-mannered. I knew you were a git and a hypocrite when you said to my face that I should present the facts we agreed to, then created a whispering campaign to discredit me behind my back. Tell me, why are you here? To spoil my holiday? Or should I have Anton add an extra chair in the dungeons for you? But you must promise not to bring those horrible chains."
I must wear the chain I forged in life, replied the ghost. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you? Or would you know the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was full as heavy and as long as this, months ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain.
Malfoy glanced about him on the floor, in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing. So, then, am I to wrap the chains in tinsel and dance a cravat from now till next solstice eve?
Perhaps. I have no assurances to give.
Cockoroff replied, and clanked his chin so hideously in the dead silence of the night that the ward would have been justified in indicating it for a nuisance. Malfoy, of course, wished he had the chance to do so, but it would be ill-mannered to use his wand to cast out the ghost of one who had died on manor grounds. He would get a reputation in the spirit realm that he did not seek. He searched his mind for a reason to entreat Cockoroff to leave, so he could get on with his speech-writing duties. He was glad that this recitation was not one that he trusted to that Weasley clerk.
"Oh, captive bound and double-ironed,"
continued the Phantom,
"I have learned over the past months that the common welfare was to be my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence all at this time of the rolling year,"
the spectre said.
"I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my nose turned up, certain of my mask, when I ventured forth on destructive missions and activities with you by my side?"
Malfoy was very much dismayed to hear the spectre going on at this rate, as he had a plethora of other projects to accomplish that evening. He wanted to sneak into the house elves' quarters and tuck coal into each of their parcel bags, which they hung every year as replacement for the stockings none of them owned, in desperate expectation of gifts, and scarf down at least a half dozen of the sugar quills that had been set aside for the children at the party.
"Hear me,"
cried the ghost, calling his mind back to the present.
"My time is nearly gone."
"I will," Malfoy said, "but be quick about it, sir. I have many more important things to do with my time than listen to the likes of you."
"You will be haunted,"
resumed the ghost,
"by 3 spirits."
"Oh, yes?" Malfoy asked shortly. "So?"
"This is to be a chance and hope you need, Malfoy."
Cockoroff started in a faltering voice. "Is it?" Malfoy replied in a bored drawl.
"Without their visits," said the ghost, "you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first within the hour, and the others will follow in quick succession."
"Will I be done with this nonsense with sufficient time for me to draft the balance of my speech before the guests arrive? You know how I hate to be pressed to a deadline when I have an important writing project to get out of the way." The ghost did not reply with a specific answer, which frustrated Malfoy to no end.
"Look to see me no more, and look that, for your own sake, you remember what has passed between us."
He disappeared into the floor in the way that ghosts so often did, and Malfoy was not displeased, as he had nothing further to say to the apparition. Malfoy had never heard of a ghost being ordered to send messengers and visitors before, at least not in such a context, and decided to pass it off as a momentary antagonism by Cockoroff against himself. He returned his thoughts to his parchment and wrote a few more invigorating lines about the need to remove insidious Muggle influences from common entertainments. He did not spare a glance to his mantelpiece, where the celestial clock was setting to chime the presence of the moon in the 7th house and Jupiter's alignment with Mars. Ding dong! The curtains of the window were drawn aside by a pair of hands, and then the undersheets were pulled aside by another pair, as Malfoy, starting up into a slouched attitude, found himself face to face with the unexpected visitors who drew them. As close to it as I am now to you, and I am standing in the spirit at your elbow. The pair were strangely garbed for ghosts, clad not in the styles they wore when they were killed, as was common among modern spirits. Each wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. They held a branch of fresh green holly in their hands, and, in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had their robes trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about them was that from the crown of their heads there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of their using, in their duller moments, a greater extinguisher for a cap, which they now held under their arms. He recognized their faces in an instant. "James, I thought you swore never to darken my doorstep again, in that or any other lifetime. And Lily, you've been banned from this place since my son's naming ceremony." Oh, have I been banned? I seem to be able to circumvent the blocks you've put in place in your attempt to rewrite the past. Her voice was soft and gentle, singularly low, as if instead of being so close beside him, it were at distance. "Why the hell are you two here?" Malfoy demanded. "Why am I inundated with gate crashers?" Lily exchanged a look with James. "We are the ghosts of Christmas past." "Long past," interrupted Malfoy. "Recent past. Just times past in general." Lily spoke again. "No, your past." Most put out, Lucius then made bold to inquire what business brought them here. "Your welfare," said the ghosts. Malfoy expressed himself much obliged, but could not help thinking that a night of unbroken rest would have been more conducive to that end. James Potter shot a disgusted look at his charge and said, "Your reclamation. Take heed." They put out strong hands as they spoke and clasped him gently by the arm. "Rise and walk with us." With a motion too swift for Malfoy to properly catch, James Potter twitched Malfoy's wand from the pocket of his robes, and it disappeared into his own garb. Malfoy was impressed. It was unusual for ghosts to have the corporeal power to move things in the physical world. It would have been in vain for Malfoy to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes. Their grasp, though gentle, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the Potters made towards the window, clasped his robes in hesitation. "I am mortal," Malfoy remonstrated, "and liable to fall without my broomstick or apparition." "Bear but the touch of your hand there," said Lily, laying her hand upon his heart, "and you shall be upheld in more than this." As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon the cobblestones of Diagon Alley, but they did not see the stores as they had been earlier that day. Instead, Quality Quidditch Supplies was promoting the cushioning charms of what they called the newly released Shooting Star, and dragon liver was only 7 sickles an ounce. The sign over one of the shop windows read, "The Daily Prophet," and the legend below noted that they featured lots of news to read. "Merlin's beard," said Malfoy. The Potters gazed upon him curiously. Malfoy was conscious of 1,000 odors floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and cares long, long forgotten. "Your lip is trembling," said James. "And what is that upon your cheek?" Malfoy muttered, with an unusual catching in his voice, that it was nothing, and begged the ghosts to lead him where they would. "You recollect the way?" inquired the Potters. "Remember it," cried Malfoy with fervour. "It is not as if anything has changed very drastically in all the years that have passed." "Let us go on," uttered the Potters. They walked through the door of the Prophet Building, and as Malfoy had recollected, soon a wide interior opened up to him. Marble stairs leading up into dimness, fountains filled with splashing wine, and everywhere the decorations and music that let the newcomers know that a holiday gala was in full sway. A red carpet had been placed down each flight of stairs, and they merged together in a blood-colored puddle in the entrance, then led through the door and onto the street. Outside, there was assembled a large crowd of sightseers, whose interested and admiring faces were illuminated by 2 flambeaux, which burned at either side of the entrance. When the offices had been constructed, they had been done so the giant editorial room could become a ballroom with little effort. A second set of stairs led to the grand room, which was just below street level, and another set, almost as glorious, led to the upper rooms, where certain of the offices were stationed. All the witches and wizards who passed, gaily dressed, through the rooms were in great spirits, and shouted to each other, until the walls fairly shook with the sounds of their gaiety, causing Malfoy to glance around in disquiet. "These are but the shadows of the things that have been," said the Potters. "They have no consciousness of us." The Jacquard revelers came and went, and as they did, Malfoy knew every one of them, and of course noted the blood purity of each of their families. His parents, of course, did not have the same level of commitment to including in their social circle only those with significant generations bereft of Muggle influences and blood, unless superseded by other qualities that Lucius himself deemed worthy of incorporation. The Nuts were there, the Parkinsons, the younger members of the Bones family, Karkaroff's annoying brother-in-law, Steve, even Vestigus Black. "Why do you show me this?" Malfoy demanded of the ghosts. "If it is an attempt to surprise me into some show of regret, it will fail. I quite enjoy Christmas parties. They are an excellent opportunity to lord it over minions and greet old friends, all the while reminding them who's best and richest." The ghosts ignored this sally. "The upper rooms are not quite deserted," said the ghost of Lily. "A solitary child, neglected by his parents, is left there still." Malfoy said he knew it, and glared. They looked into the gala celebration and spotted a handsome couple from some 30 years standing at the head of the staircase to welcome those guests who passed from the hall on their way to the ballroom. The man was very grand in slate-gray robes, the woman a gracious blonde. All the guests of importance paid their attentions to the pair as they moved to the grand room, where the strains of the macho wizard drifted in from the ballroom itself, the robes of the young couples and singletons being admirably set off by the verdant green walls, the slender white pillars capped by gold acanthus leaves, and the banks of dark green foliage which decorated the alcoves of the room. During a pause, from which efforts in greeting their guests, the hostess said to her companion, "We've combined 2 of the essentials for a successful ball. Too many guests in a smallish room." Her companion noted with pleasure the elegance and lavishness of the supper tables and the sober richness of the appointments, and she then reminded him that most of the people who were present knew each other slightly. "All the ingredients were present, and success has been achieved." "There's only one other person who doesn't seem to be having the most wonderful time," the wizard pondered, surveying the scene. "He hasn't had a thing to drink, and appears almost unsure of himself, whispering into corners in a manner I have never seen on him in the office." Xanathippe paused and considered. "Well, what do you expect? He's Muggle-raised, spent all his holidays in that drafty, empty school. He's probably never seen something like this in all his days. Perhaps we should put him to work then, instead of fretting like this. I would rather concern myself with my true guests, not a staffer who is here simply because he's rather good-looking. And I had hoped he would speak with some of the exchange witches from Beauxbatons. Instead, he merely wishes to chat with Genevieve Weasley. Julius added with a sniff. How I do despise Weasleys. Oh, there is no harm in the Weasleys. They are merely tedious, said Xanathippe, adding with an exclamation. Look, Julius, there he is. Malfoy and the Potters turned to look where she indicated, and Malfoy felt his eyes widen. So surprised was he by what he saw. There, standing beside a fluttering fern, was a tall wizard. His hair was midnight black, as were his robes, and he was in the full flush of his youthful handsomeness, for he could not have been more than 21. Beside him stood a young witch with flaming red hair, and together they appeared lost in some private and amusing joke. Merlin's beard, cried Malfoy again with a laugh. It is the Dark Lord, Tom Riddle that was. How young he appears. I should hardly have recognized him. Indeed, having red eyes and skin like parchment makes a difference to the look of a man, though I had not thought much of it before. As the Malfoys senior approached Tom and his companion, Malfoy and the ghosts followed on their heels. Malfoy still with a look of amazement and surprise. Young Tom, cried Julius Malfoy, bestowing a hearty hand-clasp upon the black-robed wizard. Happy Christmas to you, a very happy Christmas. And to you, sir, replied Tom, his voice melodious and even. And young Miss Weasley, congratulations upon the news of your engagement to Reuben Starkharder. Julius sounded intrigued. Or was that announcement premature? With a glare and a muttered aside to Tom, the red-headed witch swept past the Malfoys and down the stairs. Tom watched her go without expression. Tom, Julius continued, I hate to draw you away from the festivities, but you are my most promising young reporter, and I had a very special task for you this evening, a very special and significant task. Tom's dark eyes were alight with interest and consideration. I put myself at your service, Mr. Malfoy, whatever you might require. Shall I arrange for an encore presentation of the Flying Elephant Parade along the street to remind the populace of the extravagances that the Prophet has sponsored this past year? No, nothing that requires you to venture outside in your green and silver scarf, my young friend. No, in my private office on the 3rd floor, there is something I need you to attend. Tom nodded and looked eager to embark on whatever project his employer required. My son, Lucius, is there. He is a reserved child, and we brought him here tonight in hopes of drawing him into conversations with some of the other children here, including Celeste Hawk Monitor and the Hart children, but he has expressed extreme disinterest. Julius, he had a fit and smashed 3 dancing ornaments. Not in front of the staff, dear, said the elder Malfoy sternly, turning back to Tom and noting that there are puppets in there for his amusement. You can put on a show. Of course, replied Tom serenely. I have much experience with children, having been a caretaker to the younger ones in the orphanage in which I was raised. And as in everything else, I am your servant in this matter, Mr. Malfoy. And he executed an elegant little bow. As he ascended the stairs, Lucius Malfoy and the ghosts heard the elder Malfoy say, What a considerate young man, as he and his wife returned to the gay festivities. After the happy couple had disappeared from view, Tom paused a moment before ascending to Mr. Malfoy's office and spoke to his invisible audience, his face wreathed in glee. This errand might have had all the embarkments of a tedious chore, something they would only force upon a poor orphan fathered by a worthless muckle. Only I can turn this moment to an advantageous end. I will snake my way into young Malfoy's confidences, gauge his talents and interests, and become his most trusted advisor. What is a decade of waiting if it serves to accomplish one's dearest goals? As he dashed up the steps, he laughed to himself. So you see, he never cared for you at all. Lily Potter spoke for the first time since they came across the younger incarnation of the man who murdered her. His affection was all for your station, your connections. He sought from the first to mold you into his most trusted lieutenant. Lucius Malfoy interjected, the man behind the power, the wizard who the hall dissolved at a gesture from James Potter, who said nary a word as they went, the ghosts and Malfoy, up to an office at the top of the building. It opened before them and disclosed an opulent, garish room. The torches were all tucked into streamlined sconces, and the desk and bookcases were all inlaid with onyx and malachite. The floor was marbled, save for a carpet towards the western window, which hovered almost 2 feet off the floor, and which was topped by a fully stuffed set of green leather armchairs and an ottoman. In one of these, a lonely boy sat curled up on the seat, almost hidden behind a large book. He was dressed all in green, from the soft cap atop his fine blonde hair to the suede shoes that dangled over the side of the seat. There was a polished savour in the air, a chilly sumptuousness in the place, which associated itself somehow with too much getting up by candlelight and far too much to eat. Malfoy sat down upon a form and gaped to see his poor forgotten self as he used to be. Not a latent echo in the office, not a note of the songs played in the ballroom below, or the scrape of the chairs to and from the supper tables along the halls, not a sigh among the leafless and fairy-filled boughs of the imported palm trees that faced the offices, not the idle swinging of the swings in the festively festooned yard behind. No, not a clicking in the fire, but fell upon the heart of Malfoy with a nostalgic influence. The Potters touched him on the arm and pointed to his younger self, intent upon his reading. Then, with a rapidity of transition, very foreign to his usual character, Malfoy said, in an expectation for his formal self, "Lucky boy, he's about to be shown the secrets of the world," and glared again at the accompanying ghosts. Tom moved quickly across the floor, with his long legs, was able to stand face to face with the boy in the chair. However, the child did not move the book, and none of the observers, those visible and those not, were able to see his face. Basilical Elaborations of Sorcery. Excellent book, Lucius. I read it my first year at Hogwarts myself, Tom said in a voice devoid of pretense and malice. The young Lucius ignored the speaker, too absorbed in what he was reading. Tom tried again to get young Lucius's attention. You don't seem interested in childish things like puppets. Perhaps some of the sugar plums from the tray? He asked, gesturing to the silver platter a house elf had delivered shortly before. Or would you prefer a timbale à la Milanese or baguette de Salivelle? I would like to be left alone to read in peace, cried the boy in a shrill and ill-tempered tone. Confections do not tempt me. It is spells which hold my interest. And which spells fascinate you, young Lucius? Asked Tom in a caressing tone. Should you like to know how to raise and control the most powerful of monsters, or how to turn the basest of minerals into gold? The boy's eyes widened and he lowered his book. Oh, yes, I should like to know that. The truth is, added Tom confidingly, that when you attend Hogwarts, as I did, young Lucius, all paths will be open to you, and while there will be much to be learned from your fellow Slytherins, for I am sure that you will be among the inhabitants of that most noble of houses, there is even more power to be gained in the library. All Lucius's attention was on young Riddle now, and Tom leaned back, smiling as he spoke. I have always said, he continued, that one of the most powerful tools at any wizard's disposal is a really good book. Riddle's voice began to fade as, with an awful smile, the ghost of James Potter again raised his hand, and the opulent room faded away into mist, and James's voice took on a misty tone, saying, "Let us see another Christmas." Malfoy's former self grew larger at the words, and the room became a little darker and a little dirtier. The panels shrunk, and the windows cracked. Fragments of plaster fell out of the ceiling, and the naked laths were shown instead. But how all this was brought about, Malfoy knew no more than you do. He only knew that he was looking upon a place he had never seen, a tumble-down of dull red brick, with a little Duricrawl surmounted cupola on the roof, and a bell hanging in it. It was a large house, but one of broken fortunes, for all the spacious offices were little used, their walls damp and mossy, their windows broken, and their gates decayed. Fowls clucked and strutted in the stables, and the coach houses, sheds, and area around the moat were overrun with grass. Nor was it more retentive of its ancient state within, for entering the dreary hall and glancing through the open doors of many rooms, they found them poorly furnished, cold, and vast. A pair of boys stood in the yard, puzzling over some creation. Malfoy looked at the ghosts, and with a casual toss of his head, glanced with a bored look towards the door. It opened, and a little girl, much younger than the boys, came darting out, and putting her arms about their necks, addressed them as her dear, dear brothers. After a few minutes' conversation, another voice was heard from the house. It was a familiar and most hated voice, but in this moment contained none of the loathing which had grown through the decades between Arthur Weasley and Lucius Malfoy. "Yo-ho, my boys," said Weasley. "No more projects or plays tonight. Christmas Eve. They are here, you are home, and we are to celebrate. Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here. The Hawk monitors will be here shortly, and we have suppers to organize. Hilly-ho, Fred, chilly up, George, and such for the others, Tiny Gin." Clear away? There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away, or couldn't have cleared away, with their father looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off, as if it were dismissed from the gardens forevermore, and the air was charmed to be full of warmth. The torches were hung from the branches with care. The tree walked through the door and took up residence in a corner by the house, where it was still easy to see the clearly handmade ornaments that decorated its greenery. And though they were outdoors, because, as Malfoy supposed, there was not enough room in the house's public areas to hold such a number of people as this, they were as snug and warm and as dry as could be, and it was as bright a ballroom as you would desire to see upon a winter's night. Out came a lad with a fiddle and a music book, and went up to the lofty desk, and made an orchestra of it, and tuned like 50 stomachaches. Malfoy realized in an instant that it was a year's younger version of his own new clerk, Percy Weasley. Out came Mrs. Weasley, one vast, substantial smile. Out came the other young Weasleys, including that tall brat who was in the same year as Hogwarts as Malfoy's own Draco. It was clear that they had hoped they looked beaming and lovable, but all Malfoy could see was the cheapness of their robes, and the shabbiness of the linens, and the inferior cuts of the meat on the table. They were clearly having the cheaper chicken and not the veal. There were dances, and there were forfeits, and more dances, and there was cake, and there was negus, and there was a shabby piece of roast beef, the mince pies and a pumpkin pie that was ignored by all until the youngest, the girl they called Ginny, brought it back into the house as if it held no interest for this one big, happy Weasley family. And there was a tankard of butterbeer for each child in attendance. But the great effect of the evening came after the feast, when the fiddler, an artful dog, mind, the sort of wizard who knew his business better than you or I could have told it him, struck up a version of the old hoary chestnut, Could It Be Magic? Then old Arthur stood out to dance with Mrs. Weasley. Top couple, too, with a good stiff piece of work cut out for them. 3 or 4 and 20 pair of partners, people who were not to be trifled with, people who would dance and had no notion of walking. Throughout the scene, Malfoy was led by the Potters to overhear various conversations. Mad-Eye Mooney was castinating the ministry to the eldest Weasley boy, complaining of their lack of interest in tracking dark wizards. Malfoy chuckled and wished that he had heard such things years prior, as he would have avoided certain entanglements by ministry forces. Clive and the Michelle Bones were bemoaning their daughter's expectation of receiving her Hogwarts letter in the coming year, as they had not allowed her far from their sight since Death Eaters killed his parents over 10 years before, and others agreed that the shadow of you-know-who was still upon them, though nearly 10 years had passed since his last appearance. Arabella Figg, in her rare respites from the dancing, muttered worriedly to anyone who would listen about a boy who she babysat for on occasion, but found few listeners, as nobody wanted to hear the squib prattle on. During the whole of this time, Malfoy had acted like a wizard out of his wits with boredom. He had never seen such a dull party in his life. In festivals at the manor, or when he played the role of host elsewhere, if things were so insipid, he would order dancing girls to enliven the event, or arrange for transfiguration specialists to alter the decorating scheme on the spot, or create gifts out of cocktail umbrellas for the guests. Parties were chances to be away from the children. Even Draco rarely attended anything beyond a cocktail hour where his parlor tricks were useful in one-upping the other parents. Here, the children ran wild, flying their broomsticks amid the crowd, which would have been dangerous if their parents couldn't have afforded a reasonably zippy thing amongst them. But as it was, all the guests, including the elderly lady with one eye, were able to get out of the brat's way with ease. Each conversation he overheard was full of regret, sadness, tragedy, and bereft of the political intrigue and gossip that made his parties the talk of the wizarding world. He didn't even pick up any useful information, and was actually puzzled as to why the Potters were encouraging this eavesdropping. The Potters responded by signaling to him to listen to the guests' words as they poured out their hearts in praise of the Weasleys, and when he had done so said, "Why, he has spent but a few pounds of our wizarding money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is it so much that he deserves this praise?" "It isn't that," said the Potters, heated by the remark. "What is it then?" Malfoy asked. "Weasley and the others here bemoan a fate they chose for themselves, and it's identical to the one both of you knowingly took. My master has the power to render us, any witch or wizard, happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. What he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune." He felt the Potter's glance and stopped. "Our time grows short," observed the Potters. Quick, examine this crowd, these wizards, and speak whether they have made the wrong choices in deciding to protect Hearth and Home, while you, Malfoy, you strive to destroy it. You would see them each dead if you had your way, and for what?" "Potters," said Malfoy, "you bore me. Show me no more, as you can do nothing but waste my time. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me with such trivialities? Hearth, home,
Nay, what is important is power, and there will always be those too weak to see it. One more shadow,
exclaimed the ghosts.
No more, cried Malfoy. No more, I have things to do.
But the relentless ghosts pinioned him in both his arms and forced him to listen to the words they spoke next. We told you these were shadows of the things that have been, said the ghosts. But they are what they are. Do not blame us.
Remove me,
Malfoy exclaimed.
I am disgusted by it.
He turned upon the ghosts, and seeing they looked upon him with the same expression of sadness on each of their faces, in which in some strange way there were fragments of all the faces it had shown him, wrestled with them.
Leave me! Take me back! Haunt me no longer!
In the struggle, if that can be called a struggle, in which the ghosts were no visible resistance on their part, were undisturbed by any effort of its adversary. Malfoy observed that their lights were burning high and bright, and dimly connecting that with its influence over him. He seized Lily's extinguisher cap, and by a sudden action pressed it down upon her gleaming red head. Not only she, but her husband dropped beneath it, so that the extinguisher covered their whole form. But though Malfoy pressed it down with all his force, he could not hide the light, which streamed from under it in an unbroken flood upon the ground. He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and, further, of being in his own den. He gave the cap a parting squeeze, in which his hand relaxed, then stood and picked up his snifter of brandy, which was still the perfect temperature for drinking, and took a healthy gulp before returning to his speech. To be continued. And it never was, because this was never concluded. So, thank you guys so much for joining me for this Christmas excursion side quest into Cassandra Claire's other writings. So, and I did edit this one, by the way. It was kind of odd. She had Lucius be really enthused about Christmas. I thought that was strange. I thought we were going for Scrooge here. But anyway, if you are enjoying this content, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe to the channel. And if you would like to support me monetarily, I do have a Ko-fi and a Patreon linked in the About section here on YouTube. Tomorrow we'll start the 25 days of Christmas, which go from December 25th to January 5th, exclusively on my Patreon at the $2 tier. I have readings from when my best girlfriend and I wrote our own Harry Potter fanfiction back in the day. Some of those do get spicy, so if that's not your jam, this is your warning. But if you are into spice, come have a listen. I think you'll have a good time. Anyway, those will only be available at the $2 mark for the time that I just said, December 25th through January 5th, as I will not be releasing them here on YouTube. But anyway, that is all, guys. Thank you so much. Be sure to check that out, and I will see you all in the next one. Good night.